They were the finest heavy cavalry on earth, the armored knighthood of France, dukes, counts and barons who had trained for war from the moment they could walk, mounted on destriers worth more than an entire village, encased in mail and steel that no peasant weapon was ever supposed to touch. For 300 years, men like these had decided the fate of Europe, and every soldier on the continent understood the one rule that governed every battlefield. When the knights charged, everyone else died or ran. And then, on a single August evening in 1346, on a sloping field in northern France, that rule was broken forever. By nightfall, more than 1,500 French lords, knights and esquires lay dead in the mud, the flower of an entire generation of nobility, cut down not by rival knights, but by common men, ploughmen, shepherds, village labourers from England and Wales, standing in the rain behind 6-foot staves of yew. The French called it impossible, then they called it a massacre, and finally they understood what it truly was, the end of their world. This is the story of the Battle of Crécy, the day the arrow humbled the knight, and France learned to fear the sound of the English longbow. To understand the sheer shock of what happened at Crecy, you have to understand what came before it. Since 1337, King Edward III of England had pressed his claim to the crown of France itself, and the long struggle that history would call the 100 Years' War had begun. 6 years earlier, at Sluys, England had annihilated the French fleet and taken command of the narrow seas, and in July of 1346, that command paid its dividend. Edward landed on the beaches of Normandy with an army of roughly 14,000 men. By French standards, it was almost laughably small, but it was not built like any army France had ever faced. Its backbone was not the mounted knight, but the archer, thousands of longbowmen, yeomen recruited from the villages of England and Wales, each man required by law to practice with the bow every Sunday of his life. Edward cut a burning path across Normandy, storming and sacking the great city of Caen, and marched east towards the Seine, while panic spread through Paris. King Philip VI of France answered by summoning one of the largest hosts his kingdom had ever assembled, an army at least twice the size of Edward's, perhaps 3 times, its ranks stiffened by thousands of Genoese crossbowmen, professional mercenaries reputed to be the finest missile troops in Europe. Philip's plan was simple, and it very nearly worked. He would pin the small English army against the rivers of northern France and crush it. The bridges over the Somme were broken or held against Edward, and for a few desperate days in late August, the English were trapped in a shrinking pocket of hostile country, hungry, footsore, with the greatest army in Christendom closing in behind them. Their escape came at a tidal ford called Blanchetaque, where English archers waded chest-deep into the river and shot their way across against the force holding the far bank. And here is the detail the French never understood until it was far too late. Once across the Somme, Edward stopped running. He was no longer looking for escape, he was looking for ground. He found it near the village of Crecy-en-Ponthieu, a long ridge between 2 villages, its slope open and gentle, a windmill at its crest to serve as his command post. He dismounted his knights and men-at-arms to fight on foot, ordered pits dug in the earth in front of his lines to break the legs of charging horses, and placed his longbowmen on the flanks in great jagged wedges so that their arrows would pour into any attack from 3 directions at once. Then the English ate, rested and waited for the storm. It came in every sense of the word. On the afternoon of the 26th of August, the French vanguard arrived at Crecy, strung out along the roads, disordered from a long forced march, the army stretching back for miles. Philip's own officers advised him to halt, camp, and fight the next day in good order. He tried, but the pride of France would not wait. The lords behind pressed forward against the lords in front, each nobleman refusing to yield the honor of first blood to another, and the great host stumbled towards the English ridge, less like an army and more like a flood. And then the sky itself turned against them. A sudden thunderstorm broke over the field, a hard, drenching summer rain. The chroniclers tell us that the Genoese crossbowmen, whose great shields had been left far behind in the baggage train, could do nothing as the rain soaked and slackened their crossbow strings. Across the field, the English archers simply unstrung their bows and coiled the strings away, dry, under their helmets and coats. When the rain passed, the evening sun broke through low in the west, directly behind the English line and directly into the eyes of France. The Genoese went forward first, thousands of them, advancing up the slope with shouts and war cries meant to shake the men above them. The English line stood in silence. The Genoese halted, leveled their weapons and loosed, and their rain-slackened bolts fell short, thudding harmlessly into the wet earth. Then the English archers took one pace forward and drew. What happened next was described by the chronicler Froissart with a phrase that would echo for centuries. The English arrows fell so thick and fast that it seemed like snow. A trained Genoese crossbowman could loose perhaps 2 bolts in a minute. A trained English longbowman, shaped by a lifetime of practice, could loose 10 or more, and there were thousands of them on that ridge, shooting together. Every single minute, tens of thousands of arrows climbed into the darkening sky and came down on the crossbowmen like steel-tipped hail, punching through cloth and flesh. And without their shields, the Genoese had nothing but the arithmetic of slaughter. The finest professional missile troops in Europe broke in minutes and streamed back down the slope. And it was at this moment that French chivalry revealed the rot at its own heart. Watching the Genoese flee, the great lords of France did not see ruined weapons and impossible odds. They saw cowardice, and they saw commoners blocking the path of their glory. The Count of Alençon, the king's own brother, is said to have cried out to kill the fleeing rabble, and the first great charge of the French knighthood at Crecy was driven home, not into the English line, but into their own mercenaries. Mounted noblemen hacked and trampled the Genoese survivors, even as English arrows continued to fall on them both. The battle was minutes old, and France was already killing France on a hillside lit by the setting sun. Then came the charges, the full, terrible weight of the French nobility hurling itself at the English ridge. Not once, not twice. The chroniclers counted 15, perhaps 16 separate charges, surging out of the twilight and on into the darkness of night. And every one of them broke the same way. The arrows came down in sheets, and though the finest plate might turn some of them, the horses had no such protection. Maddened animals reared, bolted and crashed into one another, hurling armored riders into the mud, where the press of the charge behind rode straight over them. The dead began to pile into walls of horseflesh and steel, and each new wave of knights had to pick its way through the wreckage of the last, slowing, stumbling, dying. The few who reached the top of the slope found England's men-at-arms waiting on foot, rested and unbroken, while Welsh knifemen slipped between the horses to finish the fallen. And amid the din, the chronicles speak of something new and monstrous on a European field of battle, the roar and smoke of English cannon, small and crude, killing few, but announcing, in fire and thunder, the age that was coming. At the heart of the fighting stood a boy, Edward of Woodstock, Prince of Wales, 16 years old, in black armor, commanding the English right division where the French pressure fell heaviest. At one point in the struggle, the fighting around the prince's standard grew so desperate that a knight was sent running to the windmill to beg King Edward for reinforcements. The king asked one question: was his son dead or wounded? No, said the messenger, but hard pressed. And Froissart records the king's reply: one of the most famous sentences of the Middle Ages. Then let the boy win his spurs, for the day shall be his. The father watched from the hilltop, and the son held the line. England would come to know that boy as the Black Prince, and France would learn to dread his name for 30 years. Of all the men who rode against the English ridge that evening, one has haunted the imagination of Europe ever since. John, King of Bohemia, an ally of France, a legend of chivalry, and a man who had been completely blind for years. Hearing the battle turning to ruin around him, the old king asked one thing of his household knights: to lead him far enough forward that he might strike one blow with his sword. His companions tied their horses' bridles to his, so that the blind king would not be lost in the press, and together they rode into the arrow storm. The next morning they were found where they had fallen, the king and his knights dead together, their horses still tied to one another. Tradition holds that the young Prince of Wales, in tribute, took the dead king's badge of ostrich feathers and his motto, Ishdeen, I serve, the emblem which the princes of Wales carry to this very day. By midnight it was over. King Philip of France had 2 horses killed beneath him and took a wound to the face, and his household finally dragged him, protesting, from the field. He arrived in the dead of night at the gates of a nearby castle with only a handful of companions, and when the challenge rang out from the walls, demanding to know who came, the King of France gave an answer that captured the whole catastrophe in a single sentence: "Open your gates. It is the fortune of France." Behind him, on the slope below the windmill, the fortune of France lay dead in the dark. The English held their ridge in silence through the night, and when the morning fog lifted, the heralds walked the field to count and identify the fallen by their coats of arms. The number they returned has stunned historians ever since: 1,542 lords, knights and esquires of France and her allies dead on the field, among them the King of Bohemia, the Count of Alençon, the Duke of Lorraine, the Counts of Flanders and Blois, a roll call of the great houses of France cut down in a single evening. Thousands more common soldiers and Genoese lay with them, and the English losses, a few hundred at the very most. Some chroniclers claimed mere dozens. The numbers were so grotesque, so unbelievable, that when the news spread across Europe, many simply refused to accept it. An army of knights, the greatest in Christendom, destroyed by yeomen, by arrows costing a few pennies apiece, loosed by men a French nobleman would not have allowed to touch his horse. That was the true wound of Crecy, deeper than any arrow. For the French nobility, the battle was not merely a defeat, it was heresy made real. Their entire world rested on the idea that a man born to arms, trained for decades, and armored in a fortune of steel, was worth 100 commoners in the field. Crecy took that idea and buried it in the Picardy mud, and the deepest tragedy for France is that she refused to learn. 10 years later, at Poitiers, the same charges rode into the same arrow storm, and this time the King of France himself was taken prisoner. 70 years on, at Agincourt, a new generation of French chivalry drowned in the mud under the same grey rain of goose-feathered shafts. Crecy was not an accident, it was a revelation. From that ridge, Edward marched north and starved the great port of Calais into surrender, giving England a gate into France that she would hold for over 200 years. But the true conquest of that August evening was not a town, and it was not a ridge, it was the mind of France itself. For generations afterwards, French soldiers would go into battle against England, carrying something their fathers had never known: fear. Fear of a quiet line of common men on a hillside. Fear of the creak of yew staves drawing back as one. Fear of that sound rising into the sky, the sound France heard at Crecy and would never, ever forget.